Modern movies look incredible. The image quality is sharper than ever. Cameras are more advanced. CGI can create almost anything imaginable, and TVs today are capable of showing levels of detail that would have looked impossible 20 years ago. And yet, despite all of that progress, a lot of people walk away from modern movies feeling strangely disconnected. Not because they look bad, but because they didn't feel memorable. That's the strange contradiction nobody really talks about. Movies became visually better while somehow feeling emotionally smaller at the same time. And once you start paying attention to that difference, it becomes surprisingly difficult to ignore. What makes this even more interesting is that, while modern streaming platforms keep pushing newer and newer content every week, many viewers quietly return to older films when they actually want to feel something meaningful. And surprisingly, some of the best examples of this are available completely free on YouTube right now through official uploads and public domain preservation. That alone says something important about how storytelling works. If movies from decades ago are still emotionally stronger than many modern releases, then maybe technological evolution and emotional evolution are not always moving in the same direction. If you enjoy understanding how technology quietly changes the way we experience entertainment, consider subscribing to Thinking to Quantum, because this is exactly what we explore here.
Fury of the Dragon from 1976 is a perfect example of this older style of physical action filmmaking. What makes the movie interesting is not just the martial arts itself, but the rhythm behind it. Older kung fu films understood that fights become more satisfying when the audience can actually follow movement clearly. The camera stays wider, cuts happen less frequently, and choreography becomes part of the storytelling instead of just visual noise. That's something many modern action movies lost when editing became overly aggressive. Fury of the Dragon still feels energetic today because the action feels tangible instead of digitally manufactured. Savage Dawn from 1985 takes a completely different approach, but it reveals something equally important about older action cinema. The movie feels raw, dusty, and physically uncomfortable in a way modern films rarely attempt anymore. Lance Henriksen brings a quiet intensity that makes the entire environment feel dangerous even during slower scenes. The violence feels grounded because the world itself feels grounded. You can almost feel the heat, the isolation, and the tension in the atmosphere. A lot of modern action films rely on visual scale, while movies like Savage Dawn relied on physical presence and mood. And strangely enough, that often makes them feel more immersive decades later. The Fourth Protocol from 1987 shows another side of classic action and suspense that almost disappeared from modern filmmaking, which is restraint. This is not a movie trying to overwhelm the audience every few minutes. Instead, it builds tension slowly through paranoia, espionage, and political uncertainty. Michael Caine and Pierce Brosnan create suspense through intelligence and behavior rather than constant action scenes. What makes the movie still work today is how mature it feels. It treats the audience like adults who can sit inside tension without needing non-stop stimulation. That slower and more deliberate pacing is exactly what many modern thrillers lost. The Killing Time from 1987 feels much more psychologically unstable, and that instability becomes the source of the tension. Kiefer Sutherland brings an unpredictability to the film that keeps everything uncomfortable in the best possible way. The movie constantly feels like something is about to go wrong, and because the pacing is more patient than modern action thrillers, the suspense has time to settle into the audience. A lot of newer films are afraid of silence or slower moments because they worry viewers will lose attention. Older thrillers understood that silence itself can become part of the tension. The Human Factor from 1975 may be one of the most emotionally cold revenge thrillers on this list, and that's exactly why it stays memorable. The movie doesn't glorify violence the way many modern action films do. Instead, it treats revenge as something obsessive, destructive, and psychologically consuming. Quentin Tarantino has openly praised the film, and once you watch it, you can immediately see why. The pacing, the atmosphere, and the emotional restraint all feel very different from the loudness of modern revenge cinema. It's not trying to excite you every second. It's trying to slowly pull you into the mindset of the characters. Back to Back from 1996 represents a very specific era of action filmmaking that almost disappeared completely. This was the period before CGI fully took over action choreography, which meant fights, chases, and stunts still depended heavily on physical performers. Michael Rooker brings real presence to the movie because he feels like someone existing inside dangerous situations instead of simply moving through visual effects. There's also something very nostalgic about 90s action movies because they still balanced seriousness with simplicity. The plots were usually easier to follow, which allowed the audience to focus more on tension and character dynamics instead of constantly processing exposition. Running Red from 1999 closes this list perfectly because it captures the final years before digital action filmmaking completely changed the genre. Jeff Speakman brings a physical realism to the combat that makes every fight feel heavier and more exhausting. The movie understands that action scenes become more effective when the audience feels impact instead of simply seeing movement. That's one of the reasons so many older action movies still hold up emotionally. They often look smaller than modern blockbusters, but they felt larger because the danger seemed real. And that's probably the biggest difference between older action movies and modern ones. Older films often understood that tension comes from vulnerability. Characters got tired. They got hurt. They made mistakes. The environments felt real, the stunt work felt dangerous, and the pacing allowed audiences to actually absorb what was happening. Modern action movies often move so fast that scenes stop carrying emotional weight because the audience never fully settles into them. What makes this conversation even more interesting is that modern technology itself is not the problem. Some of the best-looking action movies ever made exist right now. The real issue is how technology changes filmmaking priorities. Once movies became capable of showing almost anything, many productions stopped relying on atmosphere, restraint, and physical realism as much as they once did. And ironically, that technological freedom sometimes removed the very tension that made older action films feel memorable. If you enjoy exploring how movies, technology, and storytelling evolve over time, consider subscribing to Thinking to Quantum, because that's exactly what we explore here. Thank you for spending part of your time here with me today. Hopefully this gave you a different perspective not just on older action movies, but on why so many of them still feel more intense and immersive decades later. Because once you start noticing these differences, the way you watch action cinema changes completely. See you in the next video.